Take a closer look at this now with Sourabh Gupta in Washington, D.C. He is a senior fellow at the Institute for China America Studies. Sourabh, it is an all but certainty that Xi Jinping will lock in a third term, but that's actually a break from the norm. What is Xi's plan for China, and why hasn't he stuck with the tradition of passing the reins to a younger leader after 2 terms?
Well, I think he thinks that China is at a very important transitional point and it requires strong leadership, and that he is the person to provide that leadership. Now, there's a lot of disagreement on whether he has got that right, and that China straying away from its collective leadership capability might actually be to China's detriment. But Xi himself feels that he is the man for the moment and that he will take China to its national rejuvenation goals.
Yeah, he's moving into his second decade in power now. And ahead of this party Congress, we're seeing a heavy propaganda push in China and also rare protests in Beijing in just the last few days against Beijing's zero COVID policy. Has the public soured on Xi?
No, I don't think the public has soured on Xi. They appreciate strong leadership, but there are questions with regard to his leadership, and particularly the fact that he has crushed dissent and shortened the space for civic discourse has not been terribly appreciated. It's not appreciated because it might, in the larger scheme of things, set China back itself, and it's not just for in terms that they're looking in terms of their narrow private interests. From a larger societal good standpoint, Mr. Xi Jinping's accumulation of so much power and his crushing of dissent and his circumcision of the space of Chinese civic society does not bode well for China's long-term development and its place in the world.
As we well know, Xi Jinping closed off China's borders over the COVID outbreak, and the country is still, in many ways, closed off to the rest of the world because of its zero COVID policy. But do you think that's by design? Do you think Xi's vision for China is more insular and closed off than what Deng Xiaoping had envisioned when he opened up the country's economy?
Well, I would, yes, up to a point, but also no. Let me separate that point out here, specifically with regard to COVID. And here's a good example to look at. Yes, China has been very rigid in its dynamic clearing or zero COVID policy. Taiwan was doing very, very well with regard to protecting against COVID. And early this year, in what was it, in April, it started to ease in terms of its border restrictions. Taiwan has gone from 24 or 26 months of having less than 1,000 casualties to more than 10,000 deaths in the space of about 6 months. Now, Taiwan is a 23 million population country. Uh, China is 1.4 billion. The equivalent number, if China had open borders, might have been closer to 500,000 people dead, in spite of the fact that Omicron is contagious but not as lethal. And so we have to understand that China may be making good decisions on COVID, although it does need to get import foreign vaccines. And that I would separate from the larger point about Deng Xiaoping and opening in China, and Xi Jinping kind of closing down that space. Yes, he is doing that, but I would say on foreign investment and in opening up to the world economically, that agenda still remains fairly open, but it is in this space of crushing civic society space where I think he's really setting China back. So it's a complicated answer to a complicated set of circumstances in China.
Yeah, certainly the circumstances are quite a bit different now. President Xi had envisioned lifting millions of people out of poverty. Was he successful in that? What is the life like for people in China? COVID set aside, of course.
That has actually been one of his great successes. That's a point he harped on very early in his first term. In 2013 itself, he said the 2020, which was the centenary year almost of the founding of the party, as the year by which abject poverty, that is extreme poverty, would be abolished. And he strained and went the extra distance in this regard, and that's what he accomplished. Yes, people have fallen back a bit into poverty, but not into abject extreme poverty in the rural areas because of COVID. And therefore, it has become a stepping stone now for what he calls a rural revitalization program, which is not just about poverty alleviation, but creating growth motors in rural areas. So, this is one of the, I would say,
Okay.
rarer areas where Mr. Xi
Okay.
has got it right, and China is doing well.
All right. Sourabh Gupta joining us from Washington. Thank you so much.
You're most welcome.